welcome to Candid Conversations on our YouTube page, and of course also here on the blog at one-on-one-candidconversations.blogspot.com. My name is Cliff, and today I'm going to just do a screen capture and talk about some podcasts that I really enjoy listening to, and of course I will do a shameless plug about the one I do at the end, so you'll learn about a new podcast that is out there, and I'm quite happy to promote here, of course, and happy to do. Podcasts are really, really cool because you can get just about any kind of content you can imagine on them, and that includes music, news, you can get science, you can get all kinds of things like geography and history, and they are a terrific thing. So I do enjoy them. I have about 92 podcasts. I'm not going to feature all of them. That would be impossible to do. But there are certainly some top ones that I really do like. And I'm opening up my phone here as I speak. And I'm going to pull up my podcast player, which, by the way, is, excuse me, Podcast Republic. It's the channel I use to go forward and listen to all my podcasts, and I've been using it for a number of years, and I really enjoy the feel of it. It's a very straightforward app, pretty simple to use, generally speaking, and I like it a lot. So, Podcast Republic, check them out. Here we are. Profoundly Pointless is the name of the podcast. I think this is a podcast that merits a bit of a mention because it is really quite well known, and I'm going to pull it up here in a second. Here it is, Profoundly Pointless. We see on the first page here on the main website, body image researcher Dr. Jacqueline Siegel is the most recent guest that they've had. Now, the way this podcast works is there's two parts. There's the profound stuff. This is the interview that they're doing here with the interviewee, Miss Siegel, and they basically split this up into, as I mentioned, two parts: the profoundly and the pointless. And the profoundly part is about 10 or 15 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. I don't know. I haven't really delved into the timeline of how they split it up, but anywhere from about 15 to 20 minutes or a little bit longer is the interview part, and then the next part, of course, is the pointless part, and that's where there are two people that do this podcast. That's where they get together and talk about the interview that was just done, and then they go into other, as I like to call them, tangerines. They go into all kinds of different tangents about things. So there you go. So this is the guest that they just recently had, Dr. Jacqueline Siegel. So there you go. So who are these guys? Well, let's take a look at who they are. John Scholl is one of the podcasters that is involved in this. This is a rather interesting picture of him, but hey, go with the flow. Let's move on here. And of course, the other gentleman is there we go, is Nick Vinzan, and I believe it's Nick who actually does the interviewing. I would have to believe that's him that does it, and the other fellow is, of course, the partner in crime. So as I was saying here, so these two get together and they do this podcast, and it's really quite interesting and somewhat funny. I'm going to look on my phone at some of the episodes because to go and try and find them is going to be very, very tricky. Let's see. Some of the ones I've listened to are, for example, one with a belly dancer. Let's see here. Turkey Calling. Just some of the things here. Economist, Futurist. Beatboxing Champions. They've interviewed them. Gambling and Sex Addiction Researcher. Just to name a few of the types of topics they've touched on in this podcast that have been the focus of them. and I think it's interesting that they do this. Another duo I'm going to basically drop in on here with respect to podcasts is Daniel and Jorge Explain the Universe. Now, what's really cool with Daniel and Jorge Explain the Universe is the fact that this is a scientist, a physicist rather, Daniel Wyson and his pal Jorge, who get together. And Jorge is a cartoonist, but he's also actually kind of scientific as well. Let me just bring you into their website here. Daniel and Jorge Explain the Universe. Let me find it on the iHeart Radio app. By the way, iHeart has become a real center point for podcasts. There's a lot of podcasts. Even I'm happy to say that my podcast, which I will get to at the end of this, is featured on there. So it is there. But Daniel and Jorge, these are two guys that have gotten together. They're friends, and they've talked about a number of different things related to physics. Is there a better way to accelerate particles? What does the I can't say that word, that particular mechanism do? Listener questions, they definitely have a lot of those. And these are the guys, Jorge Shum and Daniel Whiteson. I hope I got Jorge's last name right. Both of these guys have been doing this podcast now for quite some time. It is a really, really good podcast, and I would say if you're into science and you want to even bring your kids into this, you can. It is a little over the head, I find at times, but I have to say I do enjoy listening to it. And as I mentioned, I have actually had the pleasure of speaking with Daniel in written format twice on our blog here at one-on-one-candidconversations.blogspot.com. There are 2 interviews that have been done, and I'm hoping to go forward with a third, which would be the zoomed-in video content, which I'd like to explore an interview with him with regard to that. And I think what the subject matter would be regarding something he's already spoken about a number of times, and that is aliens and humans having a conference of the minds, if you will. Are we just going to be dinner for them, or are we going to be friends with them? And I personally am in the camp of we probably would be ending up as dinner, but I don't want to go into that too much here. Let's go into the next one that I really have to say I love a lot, and that, of course, is Stuff You Should Know. And now, this podcast originated back in the early 2000s. It was part of Marshall Brain's Stuff You Should Know, which was basically a website. It still is a website. It's still out there. Stuff You Should Know still exists. But originally, that's where this came from. And what happened was this particular website developed into different programs, including this flagship show, which is now on iHeartRadio. There's been a number of iterations with respect to it, and it is really quite good. The 2 hosts, of course, are Josh and Chuck, and they are basically really, really skilled at getting people engaged. Josh Clark, Chuck Bryant are very, very good hosts. They are excellent at what they do. Some of the things they talk about are theme park cremations. I don't know if I want to listen to that one just yet. Their first road trip. I listened to the one about elephants. That was really interesting. I really got an insight about the elephants from them. That was really interesting. They've done one on my hobby, which is ham radio, which is rather interesting. A little light on some of the details, but still quite good. But then again, they only have so much time on these things to do what they do. So sometimes they have to keep it short, and there are certain things that get clipped out, but that's okay. That's the way it goes. So this podcast, I think everybody knows very well. So you can see them for sure as well in public. They do road tours, so that's really quite cool. Another podcast that's a duo as well, and I seem to be going on a theme here of duos, is Omnibus. Let me look for that. Omnibus. the Omnibus podcast. It was a part of the iHeartRadio family of shows. It no longer is, but the Omnibus project is still around. Now, this is apparently a time capsule. It's not apparently, it is a time capsule, if you will. It's it's a reference of strange but true stories compiled as a time capsule for future generations. So they talk about the futurelings in this. And of course, these are the two gentlemen that do it, Ken Jennings and Mr. Roderick himself. So their team, of course, our hosts are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. Ken, of course, the host of Jeopardy, uh, pretty much, and he was also a contestant on it, very well known for his incredible winning streak on the show. And John, part of a band called the Long Winters. He's a famous Alaskan, so he was up there. And Ken, of course, seen the world. He particularly was when he was a young man in the country of uh, South Korea. So he was part of a military family. It's pretty interesting. And also, he's a born again Christian, or supposed to be a born again Christian Baptist. So, but I think he sort of left that behind. But some of the episodes that they feature on this, and I'm going to see if I can bring any of these up, if it'll let me. Here we are. The amazing Randy Kevlar. They're talking about Kevlar. The Defector General, just to name a few. There's been a really interesting bunch of stories that they've done. For example, the Osegi Headrights or Head Knights, yeah, and so on and so forth. So they've talked about the very obscure stuff that is out there, and some of the more plain things. One of the interesting episodes that caught my attention and actually got me involved was one of their first on what's known as defenestration. And what is that? That's throwing people out of windows and off balconies. They talked about defenestration and how that worked, more or less, and some other really interesting things too that they've come across. And they were talking about the lines underneath the ocean, the cables, the international cabling that goes underneath in the ocean, in the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. Talked about the history of that and a few other things. Apparently, and I've not heard too much of it late, but a lot of times they really got into Hitler and Nazis. Rather funny thing, but here you are. That's them. Another good podcast, and this is a single by a fellow that I've actually interviewed as well. And of course, this is the Stuff File podcast. Let's bring that up. The Stuff File is hosted by Peter Anthony Holder. I've actually interviewed him. Really nice fellow. I did a written interview on Candid Conversations with him a long, long time ago. In fact, when he first started his podcast, that's when I jumped in there. And it was really quite interesting. So there you go. Some of the things that he does is, and it's pretty straightforward. There's usually a lot of interviews with authors. A lot of authors. Also, he talks with people who are regulars on his show, like Stuart Noman, Andrew Fazekas, and these two guys basically are a pair of gentlemen that are featured regularly, and they talk about, with respect to the different subjects they cover. They are, of course, space and the skies. That's Stuart Noman, and I'm sorry, no, Andrew Fazekas. My apologies. Andrew Fazekas does the what's going on in the night sky, and of course, Stuart Noman is a book critic in Montreal. That's where, by the way, the podcast is out of. It's out of the city of Montreal, where Peter Anthony had a long time run with a radio station known as CJAD 800 in Montreal. He was a night host. I really liked his interviews and I liked his style. They eventually said nah and moved on and have become one of the more generic radio stations that are out there. I don't really listen anymore to radio, and I won't go into tangerines on that. But basically, that's that. let's see. Let's find one or two other ones that I think are really good. Let's see if I can pull them up. Let's see. The weirdest thing I learned this week. Here's a good one. The weirdest thing I learned this week is done by Popular Science. It is really, really quite good. Let's see if I can find something about them and their hosts. These are very, very interesting sciencey people who do this show. They're writers, actually. All ladies. They do a really fabulous job of that. Let's see. I can probably find it on Apple Podcasts here. Popular Science, Brain Death Cookies, Fur Seal Crimes. That's one thing up here that they do. Lubed up chocolate, overly before rivalries, and so on and so forth. Just two. They usually do three stories, okay, just so you know. So let's see what else they have here in the way of a description of this. Not really. Now, they do name the hosts, but I'm sorry I don't have that offhand. But this is it. Popular Science, the weirdest thing I learned. And it's really, really good. All these really interesting things. There seems to be a lot of affinity for poop. Why? I don't know. It's like, okay, ladies, you got a thing for that. And sex seems to also creep in there quite a lot. But it is still funny. Silly Walk Science and Trombone Head Dinosaurs. Just two of the other episodes that they have there. It's got a good rating. I have to say that they've done really well for themselves. So the weirdest thing, Popular Science, check them out. Three ladies doing really cool things with respect to unusual subjects that they come across. They don't always put them in the magazine, but when they come across them, they keep everything, and then they look and go, hey, let's put this on the podcast, and that's exactly what they do. And it's really a lot of fun. Let's see if I can do maybe one more here that I think is interesting. Yes, one of my other favorite ones is Ridiculous Crime. One of the most funniest podcasts ever, as they like to say, 99% murder free. Ridiculous Crime. I've really enjoyed listening to the episodes there. One of my favorite was the stealing of Charlie Chaplin's body. It was funny because, hold on a second, because what they did was really, really good. Hold on a second. Ridiculous Crime podcast. Let's pull that up. Ridiculous Crime. Here we are. This is it. You can interact with the show, by the way. You can actually snitch on people. People do that. Why, I don't know, but hey, that's okay. So, Ridiculous Crime. It is really, really fun to listen to. And essentially, they talk about the different capers that people get into. Like I'll take that, the Diamond Doris Payne story. Didn't see that coming. LifeLock Unlocked. That sounds like something I might want to listen to. Some of the other podcast topics. Born to Run, Bill McCoy. One of the other things that they've actually done too, which is interesting, is episodes that feature children. I think there was one that were committing crimes. That was rather interesting. Let's see here. See more. I want to see who is. Yes. So and the hosts are Zarin Burnett and Elizabeth Dutton. Funny people, just absolutely funny. They're hilarious people. Another episode that I really truly loved was the one about a guy by the name of Bum Farto. That's right, Bum Farto was basically featured in one of their episodes, and it's just a funny podcast. It's really great. I mean, it's hilarious. It makes you laugh, and you just have to to go with that. Now there is another one that's similar. It's called Ridiculous Romance, and just as funny, and it talks about romance and such. I probably should look that one up too, and I'll bring that up. Have you noticed here that a lot of these are duos? A lot of people here um, are basically teaming up with another person and doing their podcast. Interesting. I'm not. It's just myself doing it. And there's a lot of single people doing their own thing too. Ridiculous Romance Podcast. Ridiculous Romance has 180 episodes. I Would Walk 3,000 Miles, the epic jungle journey of Isabel Godin. Sexy poems, silly accents, and a savvy feedback a listener mail call. All right, so that's one of them. They did one actually on Alex Trebek, interestingly enough. That was rather interesting. I actually kind of enjoyed it. They talked about Alex's romantic life, and it was really interesting to hear. I didn't know, apparently, that Alex had quite a trucker mouth. But they featured it. It was great. And there you go. So that said, they don't tell me who the hosts were, but I know who they are. Some other episodes I listen to, and I'll just make mentions of them. Here I won't bring up their websites, but I do like them a lot. I'm not huge listeners of, let's try that again. I'm not a huge listener. I'm not a huge listener of some of these podcasts, but I do listen to them. And others I do listen to quite regularly. Day 6 from CBC is a really good podcast, and it talks about different subject matters. It's very similar to some of the other CBC podcasts. It is hosted by Brent Banbury. And Brent basically features a lot of different things. It's a news magazine show. Quite good. Really enjoy it. Ideas also by CBC. Nala Ayed, the host of that. Really interesting and informative. Very deep kind of podcast. You want to basically know that you're going to have to sort of listen with an open mind and let it seep into the skull, because basically it's very in-depth. Quirks and Quirks. I've actually met this man. Believe it or not, I have actually spoken with the host of Quirks and Quirks. Let's see here. Let's take a look. I forget the name of the host. I'm sorry to say. Bob McDonald. There we are. Bob McDonald is the host. I met him. I actually met the guy years ago when I was working for CBC. I actually had a nice little chat with him, and a very nice gentleman. And finally, before I get to my podcast, I think I want to feature one other one that I kind of like. Or let's see what we can do here. Yeah, it seems to have faded away my memory here with regard to other ones. But there are literally lots and lots. I might do this again down the road. But for now, let's talk about my podcast. Tales from the Cube. It's my podcast. And what did we feature on it? Call centers. So I've been a call center rep for many, many moons. And I am going to let you know that this podcast features myself talking about different parts of the business, how it works. For example, call center terms, 4 types of customers that you're going to engage with as an advisor or an agent, or what you're going to be slotted into as far as the agent you speak with. Yes, we do that. That's the thing in call centers. We actually do all kinds of stuff that basically relates to metrics and engagement with the customer, and we have certain ways of doing things, and this is all described in my podcast, which has got 8 episodes now, and I think that you'll find it interesting. Where can you find me? You can find me on iHeart, as I mentioned, Spotify, and a few other places, including the wonderful Prime channels, including also, believe it or not, on Audible, which is pretty funny. So I'd like you to take a look at all the podcasts that I mentioned, and of course this one here, Tales from the Cube, particularly if you want to learn a bit about a different kind of subject um, matter, whether it's science, whether it's authors, whether it's whatnot. Try them out. There you go. So that's about it for now. I want to say thank you very much again for taking a look at our website, one-on-one-candidconversations.blogspot.com, and also for visiting our YouTube channel. And I hope that you'll find the podcast that I have very interesting as well here on Candid Conversations at one-on-one-candidconversations.blogspot.com, and of course on our YouTube site, and now of course in our other podcast, which basically is about call centers. See you around.